Hello and welcome to Move the Line. I'm Ryan Noonan, joined here, as always, in this spot by my friend Sharp Clark, with just a two-man game today. Connor is traveling. I think he's going to the Fantasy Football Expo. He shows himself as a better Clark, but he's really just an old school, fantasy football matrix lover at heart. But how are we doing today, buddy?
Good. Yeah. I think betting and fantasy is kind of overlapped so much in the
For
world
sure.
of player props and the way that DraftKings and FanDuel have kind of dominated the public industry. It makes sense that there'd be so much overlap. So yeah, it's a little different than what I do, but I still respect it.
Yeah, no, same. Connor I always give him a hard time. He loves to get out there and press the flesh whenever he gets an opportunity to get out there. And I love that he can do that on behalf of myself. I just moved. It's a tough week. I was not going to be traveling to go and do that in Canada, Ohio, but shout out to all the people that are out there and, mingling and getting to know each other, putting some faces to names and all that stuff. We will be able to hold down the fort. I really think he's just dodging the Patriots discussion. He is absolutely just riding the Pats hard here, wants to fade them in any way possible. Least points, worst record, all those different things. So I think he didn't want to actually have the recordings. He could just, poke me in text messages and stuff like that. So I'm sure he'll chime in the comment section at some point here with his anti-Patriots thoughts. But everyone can go over to the site right now, 4for4.com, and take a look at our divisional previews from a betting standpoint. Both Clark and I have those up on the site. Like I said, talking AFC East, we're getting the AFC started. We already have the entire NFC in the books. And look, we are getting into a very different conference here in terms of top level talent, 7 playoff seeds. It's really hard to find some teams that are, they're going to be some really good football teams, some really good quarterbacks, good offense, good defenses that are just sitting out when it comes to the AFC this year. And you can make a case that this AFC East is maybe one of the best divisions in football. The schedule is pretty challenging for them, and we'll get into all that here in a minute. We're going to continue to be here every week leading up to the season. You can subscribe if you are watching on YouTube. Still available in podcast form as well. It goes a long way in helping support the free content that we do here. Also, the betting sub is a great way to take advantage of all the bets and all the content that we have over at 4for4. If you are a fantasy gamer, if you do play best ball, if you get into the dynasty streets, anything like that, we have everything you need: articles, tools, rankings, everything. Discord is where you want to be as well. It's where Clark and I and Connor push all of the bets through as well. Great community. You talk ball with people in there any time of day, no matter where you are, all around the world. That chat is popping, especially during football season, all season long. You can find cheap ways to do it in the show notes. If you have access to BetMGM and you haven't accessed that at all, you get a betting subscription for $10 for the entire season. Super cheap. Our partner at Vivid Picks, it's a pick'em site similar to some of the other platforms that you're probably familiar with out there as well. A $5 deposit and playthrough can get you a 3-month betting subscription as well. Again, $5, $10, super cheap. Or just go over to 4for4.com/plans, jump in, join us, and get some of the bets. We've been pushing a lot of things through, and we'll probably have some more as we're 28 days or so away from real football. Going to be a pretty loaded slate of preseason games here as we record on a Thursday. So excited. We're getting really close. So, all right, buddy. AFC East looks like from a schedule standpoint, they're playing the NFC East and AFC West, and then they are rotating through from a unique 3 standpoint, the AFC South, AFC North, and NFC South. Again, I think the AFC North is another one of probably the toughest divisions in football, but you can make the case that the AFC East is right up there as well. We'll get started with the Buffalo Bills, the favorites still in the division. They are down to 10-1 comparison to some of the last couple of years to win the Super Bowl, to win the AFC. You can get plus 475 on Caesars to win this division. This is the longest number in a little bit here. Plus 130 out there on MGM, plus 125 on Caesars, and the win total 10.5, juiced a little bit to the over. Clark, I'll kick it to you to get us started on the Bills.
Yeah, I'm buying the metaphorical dip on the Bills. 10-1 is generous. And yeah, like a lot of that comes from how difficult their schedule projects to be. Like, it's not going to be easy, but whoever emerges from this division is, one, going to be proven to be a very good team, and 2, will have played a lot of those really tough games that really force you to improve over the course of the season. And I really think the Bills are head and shoulders above every other team in this division. So I think they're going to come away with a home playoff game, 2 or 3 seed maybe, and have a path in the playoffs where they have the most important pieces, right? The elite quarterback who can make plays, a good defense anchored by a strong secondary, and a front four that can actually get pressure on the quarterback for the most part. It's still a team that I think is built to win Super Bowls. They just haven't delivered in the playoffs in the last few years. And I chalk that mostly up to variance, not some kind of fundamental flaw in the team's chemistry, or, they just can't win the big one. Like, I don't think that applies, especially when you think about the greatest football game ever played, the game against the Chiefs a couple years back. Like, they did everything they possibly could to win that game. And then the Chiefs pulled off a miracle with 13 seconds left. So yeah, I think the Bills are in a good spot this year. And there's more I like about them. I can get into it, but I want to give you a chance to open up your thoughts too.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some value in buying the dip with I think just the preconceived notion that maybe they've been bypassed by maybe even some other teams in the division. They don't have necessarily the layups within the division. I think they're like 15-3 over the last 3 years in the division, which is, really nice. They've just kind of ascended to the top spot since Tom Brady left and went to Tampa Bay. I was, vacated spot. And again, the Jets have had quarterback issues and talent issues. Miami too, turnover at the head coaching position. They ascended a little bit last year and are a little bit more interesting. Obviously, New England is heading in a different direction. There was some strange things last year in terms of a couple major health situations. I mean, first of all, underrated that they lost both of their anchors in the secondary with Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. Kind of underrated injuries. People don't like to give that type of player credit, but that's an impactful injury. The Von Miller injury, more impactful because it impacted what they were doing early in the season with such great success, where they were able to just rush forward and win that way and be able to sit back and be multiple in the back half. Couldn't really do that. Or that was, I think, the problem. And I think that's why Leslie Frazier's out. Sean McDermott is, head coach and defensive coordinator this year, because once they stopped being able to do that successfully, they still tried to do that. And that didn't really work. So there's a few different things too that I think from a variance standpoint that is going to work in their favor. They were wildly terrible on 3rd and 4th downs last year defensively. They were really good on early downs, but I think 28th, I have it somewhere here. Let me see. It was just incredible to see how bad that they were, especially being good on early downs. They were 29th in DVOA on 3rd and 4th down and mid to go. So that's between 3 and 6 yards. They were 26th on long to go, 7+. They were 4th in defensive DVOA overall. So really good early downs. And again, there's something to that, being a little bit more predictable. We do some work trying to chart some of the things teams do schematically. And the Bills kind of did their thing where it's hey, we're going to do what we do and you need to beat us. And it worked for the first part of the year. And it stopped working, but they didn't really change. And I think that's maybe where they got into some off-season philosophical differences and why there's been a change there, even though Leslie Frazier's been successful in that role for a while. Also, some turnover stuff on Josh Allen's side. And I want to give him the benefit of the doubt that that's a little bit more going to regress to what we've seen over the last few years and not the gunslinger Josh Allen that we saw at Wyoming, that we saw early, because he turned the ball over a lot. There was 14 interceptions last year. I believe 6 of those were in the red zone. And then there was a bunch of fumbles too. And he lost, I think, 8 fumbles, 13 fumbles, 5 recovered. He lost 8 of them. So they got to get a little bit better with protecting the football, be a little bit better in having someone step up outside of Stephon Diggs. And I think that's what they tried to do by adding, Dalton Kincaid in the draft. Now, you don't see a lot of rookie tight ends come in and just seamlessly hit the ground running, but a lot of talk about him being, a big slot, a secondary receiver. Josh Allen had an elbow injury. I think that was a thing as well. And Gabe Davis had a high ankle sprain. So there's a lot of things here that didn't go really well. And yet they still hosted a division round playoff game. Now they were able to get picked apart by a Bengals team that knew kind of what they were going to be looking at. So I think Sean McDermott maybe allows them to be a little bit more multiple defensively. And if we get some stuff here that kind of regresses to what we saw over the last 3 years prior, I think there's good opportunities to buy the dip. 10.5 win total, plus 130 in the division, and 10-1, even almost 5-1 to represent the AFC. This is way different than what we've seen price-wise. And to your point, it's not an entirely different roster than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I totally agree with pretty much all your points. Like the secondary, and Trey White missed most of the season too.
For sure. Yep.
Khair Elam missed time. DeMar Hamlin was only playing because of all these injuries, and then he got hurt. Obviously, their secondary was just a mess the entire year. No consistency, no chemistry, and that explains a lot of why they failed on those 3rd and longs. Like the epitome of their season, right, was the Justin Jefferson catch on 4th and 17. That the difference between winning and losing that game. There's some other things that happened, but like they just weren't able to win in those high leverage moments, and that to me tends to be not predictive. On the offensive side, I do think Kincaid can make a difference from day one. A lot of these like historical trends on how quickly tight ends acclimate, like how many of them played with a quarterback that was as good as Josh Allen, right?
Sure.
In addition to that, I really like Khalil Shakir. Played well as a rookie, as sort of like a specific role player with a specific job. And then they added Deontay Hardy, who is another really good field stretcher. Like they've got weapons that I think are underrated at doing specific things. And so it's going to come down to whether or not Ken Dorsey in this offense, right? Ken Dorsey, I think, is the offense coordinator, can put the pieces in the right place, because with Josh Allen at the helm, they can do it. I think they're going to run into some more heavier sets with 2 tight end sets now they have Kincaid. And I think that will be good for Josh Allen as well. Like kind of like what the Chiefs did last year a little bit with, maybe not going so much heavily into 4 or 5 wide receivers, but more so like let's build up some beef up front and kind of force defenses to play honestly at the line of scrimmage. So yeah, I'm excited about what this Bills team can do. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism.
Yeah, they only played 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets on 8% of the snaps last year. It's 31st in the league. They're, I think, more equipped to do that, with the addition of Kincaid. And then same thing with the running back situation. Damian Harris will be a different element, different layer for them in terms of short yardage backs. I think James Cook showed the ability to earn targets as a pass catcher as a rookie with a scrambling quarterback. It's not something that we always see typically, right? It's a pretty good correlation between running quarterbacks not throwing the ball as often to their running backs. And the fact that they did sprinkle in James Cook and he did successfully with that role, I'm encouraged too. So I think there's just more pass for them to be less predictable, less reliant on Josh Allen's legs, where that can become a luxury again versus something that they really need to do to move the chains. And, Steph Diggs was good, but if, again, someone, whether it's Gabe Davis, Kincaid, Shakir, like you said, someone steps up to give them a little bit more versatility, I think that adds things here too. So defense,
and I don't buy it. Yeah, like a lot of people are talking about, well, Miami with a backup quarterback gave them a run for their money in the wild card round, and like that's such a mischaracterization of that game. Like
that wasn't how the game played out.
Yeah, I mean the Dolphins have 15 drives and averaged fewer than 20 yards per drive. They averaged 3.8 yards per play. But there was again a couple of high leverage moments. I think Allen threw a pick 6 or maybe like a fumble 6. These things, like if you watch the games, it's the Bills dominated that game for the most part, and the score was misleading. The last game against Cincinnati does bother me, but again, that was in the elements, bad game plan, those kinds of things. Like I'm not full on like, yeah, the Bills like should be deemed Super Bowl favorites. The Chiefs should be and are accurately deemed Super Bowl favorites. But I just think that quality of play wise on a play-to-play basis, like the Bills are still, at the top of the league, near the top of the league. And there's no reason to think that there's some kind of regression happening right now.
Yeah, I think you make a good point too, because you come out of this division on top, or even as a playoff team, you've somewhat already proven yourself and run the gauntlet. We're not going to run into a scenario that we had with the 49ers or Philadelphia last year, where we think that they're very good football teams. They're in the conference championship game, but we don't really know how to grade them on a curve with the rest of the league because they just didn't play anybody. They're going to have to play people, including just their division games at all in general, to be able to get on the other side of this too. Then you mentioned the schedule, and we're going to have this pretty much throughout here. This AFC East schedule is really tough. They are, let me see here. I think 28th, 29th in terms of strength of schedule, in terms of, the win totals of the teams that they're playing. It's going to be a challenge, but again, these other teams have to play the Bills too. And that's not a great scenario too. So yeah, I mean, I think AFC East at plus 130 over in the win total, though it's juiced over. How are you looking to bet the Bills?
Both the division and Super Bowl odds are good with me. Don't really love the win total. Like you said, the schedule is really brutal. So when you have a win total that's juiced to the over, like minus 140, minus 150, like it is, you're basically saying like this bet only makes sense if they stay healthy and things go according to plan. And that's just a silly thing to bet on. I'd rather take the plus money odds on them winning the division or the higher odds of them winning the Super Bowl. I'm saying they're capable, right?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
Right, we'll move on to the Jets. Let's see what the Jets prices are. 18 on FanDuel to win the Super Bowl is the best number. They are 10-1, basically across the board to win the AFC. To win the division is plus 270 on DraftKings and a 9.5 win total, pretty much juiced to the over. I think it's really, I don't know, somewhat irrelevant to try to recap a lot of the 2022 season. 7-10, strong defense, quarterback issues. They rolled out 3 different guys. None of it was really good. They were among the bottom 5 offenses, and basically anything that you would want to do: yards per drive, points per drive, success rate, EPA per play. A lot of the heavy lifting was done by the defense. But again, now we have the hard knocksification of this team. A lot of Aaron Rodgers here that we're going to have here in the preseason. I'll let you get started with your thoughts on the Jets.
My opinion on the Jets defense really shifted over the course of the year last year. I remember thinking early on, like, this defense is kind of questionable. They've been taking advantage of, guys that maybe backup quarterbacks. Like, they had a really favorable spot against Miami, like Pittsburgh. But, the Bengals played well against them. It was like, I just wasn't convinced. And then by the end of the year, I was really impressed. I think that their depth on the defensive front really allows them to stay fresh throughout the game. And the way that Sauce Gardner played, obviously, and the rest of that secondary against some pretty good quarterbacks, right? Like, down the stretch, they played against Josh Allen and the Bills, the Lions when they were really clicking offensively, the Jags when they were really clicking with Trevor Lawrence, and the Seahawks, who, were pretty good with Geno Smith. That was kind of how they ended their season. And I thought they really held their own against all those opponents. And so I do have optimism about the quality of this defense. And, I've been seeing some skepticism in terms of like, well, they stayed super healthy last year, so how can you project that into this year? And that doesn't really matter for week 1, right? They are healthy. So like, sure, if they get hurt, I'll adjust my opinion on the defense. But like, as of right now, this is an elite defense with talent and depth at every key position. And then on the other side of the ball, like it's we don't know how it's all going to work out. Like, anytime there's such a new element introduced, Aaron Rodgers is undoubtedly going to be better than Zach Wilson and Mike White and Joe Flacco were last year. How much better, I think, is the big question, right? Because if he can be his MVP self in his age 39, age 40 season, then this team can make it to the Super Bowl, right? It has the defense, has the chops, has the wide receiver 1, has the quarterback. But what I'm a little worried about is if the offensive line isn't as good as what he was experiencing in Green Bay, how well does he stick to the plan, let plays develop, patiently kind of work with these guys as some potential growing pains emerge in the first 6 weeks? They have a brutal schedule.
Brutal.
It's a little bit of like a teeter-totter, right? Where like you can kind of see things like they all look happy right now. They're all super pumped, like good vibes in New York, but things start to go downhill with no letting up in their schedule. And Aaron Rodgers, like, I don't know, like, he's an enigma, and I could see this kind of becoming I'm going to run out the clock type of thing. So I think that this team has a truly wide range of outcomes based on the difficulty of their schedule and based on how good they can be if things do click. So it's a team that I'm not looking to take a strong stance or opinion on in the preseason. It's a team that I'm going to be looking very closely at in the first few weeks, because I really want to identify what their real range of outcomes is based on the play on the field. And so this is one of the teams you have to pay attention to.
I agree that I think there's a lot of variance to the outcome of this team for a number of reasons. So start defensively, as you mentioned, like, I think they were good. And you listed some of the quarterbacks. Actually, with Football Outsiders strength of schedule, the defense played the toughest slate of anyone in the league last year. 5th in DVOA, 6th in EPA per play. I mean, Sauce Gardner was everything and more, and really like absolutely dominated. He allowed just 45.9% of the targets against him to be completed. Opposing quarterbacks had a 53.9% passer rating when targeting him, which is the second lowest in the league for a starter. It was really good. And like Quinn Williams up front, they now have like 4 or 5 edge rushers that they can rotate in. They have other depth in the secondary. They did lose. They brought in Chuck Clark from Baltimore. He's already gone down, but Adrian Amos picked up from Green Bay. So they've had depth, definitely on the defensive side. I think they're going to be good. Again, defensively, we know that's not super sticky year to year. They did run hot. They only lost 8.6 adjusted games due to injury on the defensive side of the ball, by far the fewest in the league. The other thing that's weird is, as good as they were defensively, getting pressure, in the back half with Gardner and company, they had a really low turnover rate. So I think that there's some the injury luck could be offset by a little bit more turnover variance. So those things kind of come out in the wash to me. So I still think this is a top 10 defense. Again, this is a division full of pretty good defenses, but you can make a case that this one is maybe the best in the league. Again, Robert Saleh is a defensive-minded head coach. I think it makes sense that they kind of turned on the second year, get a little bit of the culture stuff through, add some talent around it, and all of a sudden everything kind of gets moving and becomes kind of turnkey for year 3. Offense, yeah. I mean, I think that there are enough bodies up front that are starting caliber offensive linemen, but I think who those people are going to be, are they going to live up to expectations? Are they going to be healthy? There are question marks. Early in the season, the schedule is brutal. That's a time where you need to have that answered, and I think there's some unknowns there. Breece Hall, there's some unknowns there in terms of his health. Are they going to add Dalvin Cook? And is their chemistry early in the season? Like, we know that can be a thing for any quarterback. I think it's kind of always been a thing that's talked about for Aaron Rodgers for some reason. He likes his guys. Hey, get open. He's going to find you and win. Obviously, if there's MVP style quarterback play still in that body, like as you mentioned, it's going to turn 40 in December. Yeah, they are very, very live. The Hard Knocks hype that's going to continue to drive these prices north will probably be justified. But I'm with you. I think there's way more variance in terms of what we saw last year. It's been very protective of the football for the last handful of years, even critically, where it was he wouldn't take chances. He'd scramble out of pocket and throw the ball out of bounds to avoid any scenario where he would throw interceptions. But 12 picks last year, he had 15 in the last 4 years combined. So that could be a little bit more of what he had to deal with in terms of talent in Green Bay, but still a pretty young core of pass catchers there in New York for him as well. So there's some questions there. Someone's got to miss the playoffs in this division, in this conference. And while it's a shoo-in that everyone thinks that this is a team that could do so, I don't hate plus 120 for them to miss the playoffs, just trying to embrace a little bit of that variance. I think that's a better price to me than you're going to get under 9.5 wins. And I don't mind taking some pro jet stuff, right? Over 10.5 wins, to win the division. I think that there are, that kind of speaks to your point. The range of outcomes here, I think, is a little bit vast in comparison to some of the other teams.
Yeah. The only problem is with the odds, the books understand that this is a high variance team, right? I mean, if you look at regular season win totals, which is how books measure median projected outcomes for the regular season, they're at 9.5, juiced slightly to the over, right along with the Lions and Dolphins and Chargers and Jags. They're all kind of in that same range. But if you look at the Super Bowl odds, which are, how likely is this team to actually win it all? The Jets are noticeably ahead of all of those teams, right? Jets are 16-1, 13-1, 18-1, depending on where you look. Lions, Dolphins, Chargers, all 22-1, 25-1, Jags 25-1 to 30-1. So these are books recognizing that, due to the strength of schedule and due to how good this team can be if it hits its upside, the Super Bowl path is already being priced as more likely relative to its median outcome. So there's no real value to me in betting the upside to the Jets. I think it's just something to be aware of when you're evaluating early. But I'm staying away from the futures markets for this team.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes a math problem. And I know doing this in early August we just don't know how things are going to play out. Health is going to become an issue. It gets very easy if you have cluster injuries on a team or a quarterback injury, but feel like the Bills are in the playoffs. We can have discussions about the other teams here in the conference. Someone's got to win the AFC South. That gives you 2 teams. I don't think that's a 2 playoff team division. The AFC North is loaded, right?
Totally.
Bengals, Browns, Ravens. And we know the Chiefs, and then you still have what's going on with the Chargers. All of a sudden you have 9 teams in 7 spots. It gets a little tricky.
The problem is because I thought about this too. I on the surface, Jets to miss playoffs plus 120 is the type of bet that I would like. But I thought about kind of how the season plays out, right? And I think it's a really unique dynamic where you have probably 9 teams that, if they play to what we expect them to be, should be playoff teams. And there's only 7 spots. But what that means to me is that the 2 teams that miss are probably going to be due to variance that we can't foresee, probably injury related. And so what that means is that if you're one of those 9 teams, you're probably going to make the playoffs unless you're one of the teams that gets hit by the injury bug, right? I mean, there's other variants that can happen. But to me, it's I don't know how to predict who those two teams are going to be. Maybe it's the Bills, like we don't know. Obviously the Bills would have to suffer a little bit more in order to knock them out of the playoffs, but it seems like not the kind of bet that I love to make, in that it's not betting on my understanding of the teams. It's betting on how variance will play out. And so that's kind of why I understand why people would bet it, but that's why I'm hands off.
Yeah, you probably want a better number if it just becomes a coin flip variance scenario than plus 120. I would go that way over the under on the win total, but I think you make a good point in terms of the way to suss it out. Now, here's the thing: if you wanted to, the only problem is it's probably going to get a little bit shorter because of the opening schedule. Because you mentioned the first 6 games are absolutely brutal. It's why they got to hit the ground running a little bit to get a little bit of answers, because it does open up. They are currently favored in 9 of the last 11 games of the season. So again, it gets a little bit softer as we move through it here. But again, like how they start is going to be really impactful anyway. You can build on some of those things that are hard for us to quantify in terms of momentum and just getting confidence and all the things that can come along with that. Because still pretty much a young team on both sides of the football. But Buffalo at home to open. Then they go to Dallas, who I think we both think is going to be a good football team this year. They get New England at home, probably a win opportunity. But then the Chiefs at Denver. Again, Denver, regardless of your questions of Denver, it's always a tough place to play historically, especially early in the season. And then they get the Eagles. It's a very tough spot with like multiple playoff teams, the 2 top teams in the NFC East, and 2 of the top teams in the AFC in general with the Chiefs and the Bills. Tough slate for them. So I'm interested to see how it goes. I think there's a lot of variance. I understand why people are bullish. I do think, again, the Hard Knocks thing drives prices and eyeballs. And when we're watching the good vibes, we're watching some of those things happen. I think, that typically happens every single year. It's not going to be any different here with the Jets this season. So going to be an interesting team to watch. We will move on here to the Miami Dolphins. They are 25-1 to win the Super Bowl on Caesars. AFC has also on Caesars 13-1. Caesars also the best division price for Miami at 3-1, and the win total pretty much flat in price out there at 9.5. Mike McDaniel coming over from San Francisco, kind of hit the ground running. Tale of 2 seasons, basically. It was Tua healthy, Tua not healthy. They were absolutely on fire for the first 12 weeks of the season. Started out 8-3, stumbled obviously without Tua there, backed into the playoffs. And really nice offseason for Miami, and I understand why people are bullish. I'm there as well, but I'll let you get started why you like or don't like the Dolphins.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in the Dolphins. I think that they're sort of the team that people are getting excited about based on, I think, the wrong things. So let's talk about them a little bit. One is they're excited because the passing offense was so explosive last year, right? Tua Tagovailoa had, a very good EPA per play by the end of the year. But I think when you look a little closer at that, it's very misleading. And 2 things really concern me about it. One is through week 12, he was averaging 0.418 EPA per play, which is astronomical. It was significantly higher than even Patrick Mahomes, 54.2% success rate. From week 13 on, which was only 4 games of Tua, he averaged negative 0.137 EPA per play, which ranked 28th out of 28 quarterbacks that played 120 snaps during that time, and a 39.3% success rate, which was second worst. This was worse than Ritter. This was worse than Mike White. This was worse than all these players that played towards the end of the season. And so when a team kind of pops up out of nowhere offensively and then tails off at the end of the year, which when we look at the team, we have to consider the team with Tua, right? That was the Dolphins' relevant season. They really tailed off with Tua at the end. And that concerns me because it's more likely that it was kind of a flash in the pan than it was some kind of sustainable thing that they can do throughout the year. Like it's a little bit pick and choosing when you're only using a 4-game sample size. And one of those games includes the second half against Green Bay where Tua may have suffered a concussion. Obviously that impacts things. But the point is, if it's so fragile that like you can manipulate the numbers and point out how badly it went down, like you can't do that with guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. Like those guys don't have that 4-game stretch where they just look absolutely terrible. Tua did. And when you combine that with the fact that like watching film, Tua makes a lot of really, really bad throws. Even like during the early part of the season where he was crushing an EPA per play, there were a lot of dropped interceptions. There were a lot of like really bad plays that he got away with. There were a lot of like close to being tackles, like 8 to 10 yards that the receiver managed to elude the grasp and turn into an 80-yard touchdown. Like these types of things end up having a massive impact on the stats, but they're not encouraging from when you watch the film and try to evaluate Tua's play. So I think they're being held back by the quality of quarterback. And I know that's, controversial. Tuanon's going to come after me, whatever. The second thing is, like, people are assuming a massive jump for this defense because they got Vic Fangio, but like, I'm not necessarily convinced that Vic Fangio is the massive difference maker that people think that he is. Like, I think that he deserves credit for sort of bringing new schemes and designs to what NFL defenses do. It's like kind of a visionary in that sense, like historically, but that's different from like week to week. Like he's just coming up with, these crazy game plans that just shut down really good quarterbacks. Like I think he's still just he's a defensive coordinator, and with Jalen Ramsey hurt and, they do have talent on the defense. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's not like they have studs everywhere. Like these are guys that have to play to the highest level to live up to their expectations. So I just think it's like the Dolphins are a fine team and they've got good potential. And when things are clicking on offense, they are really, really explosive, which helps. But I don't see them as the type of team that can like make a deep playoff run. They're not going to be the type of team that I favor against any of the top teams in the AFC or even the top teams in the NFC. They're going to be the type of team that has to really hit its best stride at the best moment, kind of like they did against the Bills last year. And even then, they're going to be underdogs in these games, and it's just tough to make a deep playoff run when that's the situation you're facing.
Yeah, I think a deep playoff run is going to have to come with some home field advantage, probably. Like those things probably go hand in hand. Having to not go and play in weather in late December, early January is probably going to be beneficial to them. I think some of the Tua stuff is fair, but the numbers are the numbers. We saw that with our eyes. It was different in the second half when he came back, but I think that's part of it too. I think the guy, we obviously shouldn't have come back when he did. I think there was like a little bit of reluctance where the team knew, hey, we probably made a mistake. We shouldn't have put this guy back out there. And I think he was playing to not get hurt a little bit down the stretch too when he was playing. So yeah, I mean, I'm very bullish on not just what we saw with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I think they did a good job at adding, because really that was it last year. They dominated the target share. They did a good job, I think, adding some ancillary pieces. I think Braxton Berrios is a nice piece for them. Adds a little bit of a different layer in terms of working out underneath. That's kind of where Tua does most of his best work. They really didn't utilize like Mike Gesicki. So put Braxton Berrios, who is a really good job of getting open and creating separation in short areas. Robbie Chosen, I think is his name now. We've gone to Robbie with a Y, Robbie with IE, and now I think it's Robbie Chosen.
Chosen Anderson.
Yes, Chosen. Yeah, I don't know what it is. So again, just another element there was just no depth there. Trent Sherfield and some of the guys that were there last year. So I think they've done a good job at adding some talent around them. They, again, couldn't really sustain a Tua injury. They really can't sustain an injury to either Waddle or Hill. That would be a problem. I think the running back room is better. They ran it back basically with Mostert and Jeff Wilson, but Devin A-Chain adds a new element too in terms of just his ability as a pass catcher. His third downs, even if they want to mix him in, I think that is another speed element that fits there too. So again, like talking injuries and the what ifs, if someone were to go down, we could do with every team and poke holes in it. So as of now, they're all healthy. I'm pretty optimistic that we could see more of, maybe not the high end of what we saw early in the season with Tua, but somewhere closer to that than what we saw in the tail end of the season. I believe in Mike McDaniel and what he's been able to do as a play caller and him being able to continue to scheme wins. Like we trust Kyle Shanahan to scheme wins for his team. I want to see it maybe for a second year with Mike McDaniel, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because it went pretty damn well last year. Vic Fangio has been a guy. I think part of it too is not just Fangio. I think it's a little bit of a change from Josh Boyer. I remember this. I talked about it last year. The team, there were reports that the team was not happy that Josh Boyer stayed on when Brian Flores left. I don't think players in the locker room liked him very much. And he was pretty arrogant with what they did, running it back without really the horses to do it. I think Flores is going to do that again in Minnesota this year. It's like, this is what we do. We're going to blitz a third of the time. And they would use Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips and drop them in coverage to disguise blitzes instead of sending your big dogs to go out and like go get the quarterback. So Bradley Chubb was kind of a disappointment from like a raw output standpoint. I think even Jalen Phillips was a little bit too, but I think those guys are going to be doing what they do best this year through his scheme. Now, the Jalen Ramsey injury hurts because part of it was the depth that allowed him to move into the slot and to allow some of the other guys to kind of be in their position. That hurts a little bit, but I think they have really good talent at all levels. Like Christian Wilkins is a dominator, really outside of Aaron Donald in terms of interior defensive linemen who pressure the quarterback. Wilkins is the man. I love the addition. Like they've just had bad linebackers. I think David Long, for as long as he can stay healthy, is going to be a really good, impactful player for them. I like what they have in the safety room. We've just seen it year in and year out where Fangio comes in. It's just a change. They're going to be a lot more cover two. He's one. We heard a lot of quarterbacks talk about who do you not like to play against. Offensive coordinators say the same thing. They have trouble with Fangio's defense. So I'm a believer in the talent. It does take a little bit of hit, undoubtedly, even if Jalen Ramsey is kind of on the back nine of his career. What he allows them to do, I think that loss is impactful. So I'm a little less bullish on them, but in general, like I like betting on some of the upside scenarios here. We talked about it in terms of like, hey, maybe you want to go after coach of the year. Maybe you want to go after AFC. Maybe you want to go after number one seed in the AFC versus some of the binary win total division prices and stuff like that. But I don't know, 3-1 in the division. I don't hate that either. So I'm a little bit more bullish on Miami. I know Connor is as well. He and I think Daigle got down on some pretty early stuff, but those numbers are still out there in terms of divisional prices as well on Miami.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to bet on or against Miami because while I don't believe in them as a top tier AFC team, on a week to week basis, they're capable of the best offensive performances in the league. Like that speed is real, and like Tua, for all his flaws, like can process very quickly. And so when the offense sets up an open pass, like within a couple seconds of the snap, like he's usually able to hit it with accuracy. And when you've got both Hill and Waddle on the outside, like the options are just, like they are explosive. So they're the most bipolar offense in terms of like my game ratings, game to game. And it's just really hard to predict, like when they're going to struggle, when they're going to exceed expectations. So it's a team that I'm excited to watch, but I don't see myself getting heavily involved in, especially early, until I really have a strong grasp of who they are in year 2 of Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Again, another tough schedule in terms of what we're looking at here towards the tail end of the season. They have obviously the 6 games in the division. After the bye, they go to Germany to face the Chiefs, which that's a Chiefs home game. So I don't know, like I feel like it's a neutral win for them in terms of like home field advantage, having to go over there and not play in Arrowhead or whatever they're calling it nowadays and having to play that game in Germany. That's probably a benefit for them.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, it probably doesn't matter. I'll be honest. 5 of the last 8 and 4 of the last 5 are at home, which is really nice for them. And all the road games are on the East Coast. They basically just fly to like Washington and Baltimore. So they don't have a lot of travel in the back half of the season, which I think is really nice for them as well. So yeah, I'm in on Miami at -105 to make the playoffs. That's available on FanDuel. I like that number. I think this is a team that is, again, I want to buy into some of the early other market stuff too. I got into McDaniel Coach of the Year at north of 20. I think they're going to be exciting. And again, like I have to pretend right now they're healthy. So I think last year too, like you blitz the quarterback that much and don't get home because they were like 20th in pressure rate. I think 22nd in like just raw sacks. That's tough, man. Like you got to get home if you're coming that often. And so I think that there is a lot of reasons to be optimistic that the Fangio change alone, even without Jalen Ramsey, is going to lead to some pretty good things, especially with some of the other talent too. I mean, I don't know. I like Cam Smith coming out, who's cornerback from South Carolina. He's a nice addition there. If they can do some more stuff, Xavier Howard can stay healthy. There's some other guys there in the back half that I'm bullish on. So yeah, I'm in on them. A little bit ahead of the Jets. I think that they're a team that I'm a little bit more interested in. That's not really how the market has it currently. All right, so we'll move on to the last team here with the New England Patriots. They are 66-1 to win the Super Bowl, 40-1 on FanDuel to win the AFC. Division price is 8-1 and 7.5 wins juiced to the under. We haven't had New England in the last spot in the AFC since 2000. It's Belichick's first year in New England. Last year, I mean, look, It was not good, but the reality was they somehow had a chance to make the playoffs in the last game of the season, which they had no business being in, and it was not pretty. There was a insane amount of hubris to be able to just say, Matt Patricia, here are the keys. We're going to let you run the offense. I mean, just insane. A lot of talk about Bill O'Brien being the answer here and coming in and being the offensive coordinator. And look, Bill O'Brien had the keys in Houston to run the whole ship. He's probably another one of these guys we talked about a lot this offseason. It's just these guys that are just better coordinators than they are head coaches. Definitely better coordinators than they are general managers. And I think Bill O'Brien fits that mold. But it's just not enough because they didn't add any talent. There's still no one that separates. It's a bunch of contested catch guys that don't really have any top end speed. They've done a good job of adding speed on the defensive side of the ball. Clark, I'm just not bullish enough on what they have here. Even if Mac Jones plays like he did as a rookie, then New England has really a chance at all to really sniff the playoffs. What are your thoughts on New England?
I think they're fine. The problem is, okay, so last year, I think most people have heard by now kind of their splits of wins and losses against good and bad quarterbacks, right? Their wins came against a bunch of backups. I think the only legitimate starter they beat was Jared Goff. So, you know, to the extent he's a legitimate starter, he also was missing players.
They shut him out. They shut him out too. It was a good win.
They shut him out, but the Lions were in rough shape that game. True.
Yeah.
But they lost to every good quarterback they played, right? And the problem with that is it's not, I mean, yes, like a team is going to play better against bad teams. That's always true. But the Patriots are specifically structured in a way that gap is bigger than for most teams. And it comes on both sides of the ball, right? Mac Jones is limited in what he can do as a quarterback. He is very accurate when he's got a clean pocket. He can, when he's got a guy in single coverage, even if the guy doesn't get a ton of separation, like he can put it where the receiver can get it. It's very, very good skill that he has. But he doesn't have a ton of arm talent. And when defenses have safeties on the back end to kind of cover up those single coverage opportunities, he's just not as effective. And so when they can run the ball and bring those safeties down because they're running the ball successfully play after play, it creates the passing opportunities in which Mac Jones succeeds. When you're playing from behind against good teams, like they're not as worried about you running. You run for 5 yards, the clock starts, keeps winding, and that's just not how you get back in games that you're losing. So that's one thing that is a problem. The second thing is on defense, they're so much better at coverage than they are at winning up front. And so, when they're in positions where they're kind of like pinning their ears back and putting the quarterback in a position where they know you're passing, they can really, put quarterbacks in bad positions. But when the other team has the lead and can run the ball, the ground game, set up short passes, like really kill the clock, they just don't have the difference maker on the interior defensive line. Matthew Judon's good on the edge. Uche is good, part-time player, but they're not just dominating the defensive line like maybe some prior New England defenses have. So they're kind of vulnerable to playing, when they're playing from behind on defense. And so it kind of like feeds into itself, and that's just why they just don't perform in those situations. That's a problem because this year's schedule is absolutely brutal. Like we've been talking about brutal schedules throughout this preview because they all do face brutal schedules. But Dolphins twice, Jets twice, Bills twice, Eagles, Cowboys, Chiefs, Chargers, Broncos. Like it does not let up for this team. So if they're a team that you expect to perform worse against good teams and good quarterbacks, it's not looking like a very optimistic season. Now they'll probably catch some breaks. Things happen during the season. Some of those teams are going to be injured when they play them, etc. But not enough breaks to put them in a position where I think they can make the playoffs. I think this is a non-playoff team due to schedule that would be maybe fighting for the playoffs if they were facing a schedule like what the NFC South faces, for example. So a better team than last year with a worse record, I think, is a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, so I don't think they're going to be bad. I think they're going to be fine. I think they'll win some games they probably shouldn't. But to your point, this has been a couple years now too that they've had this trend of not just like dominating like bad quarterbacks, like best in the league defense, and then just really below average in terms of how they play against the top level talent here. The schedule, and it's not just it's throughout. Even when they get a little bit of a break in the schedule, they face running quarterbacks, which has also been a bugaboo of Bill Belichick defenses for his entire career. Sam Howell can run. I think we see Sam Howell move a little bit this year. They play overseas against Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson's going to give them nightmares. Justin Fields gave them nightmares last year. It's always been a problem for some reason for the Patriots. They play Daniel Jones. These are some of the best matchups that they have all season long. These are the easiest games in the middle of the schedule because the start of the schedule is brutal. The end of the schedule, it gets really hard to like talk in August about games that are going to happen in December because we don't know the makeup of those teams. But on paper, based off of who we're expecting these teams to be, they finish week 15 through 18. Kansas City at Denver. We've already talked about going to Denver is not easy. It's not going to be easy in December. At Buffalo, and then the home against the Jets. That is a brutal finish to the season on top of a start that includes the first 4 games, Philly, Miami, the Jets, and the Cowboys. Like, I best case scenario, 1-3, probably 0-4. That gets like New England media has been pretty spoiled with the Patriots, but like that's not a great place to be when things aren't going very well. And I think that's going to be a problem early this year. They play right now on the schedule. They have 13 of their 17 games. 13 of those teams have a win total of 8.5 or more. Those are good football teams that they're playing. And we just talked about some of the teams that don't fit that mold have rushing quarterbacks, which is just absolutely a new nuisance for them. So I think it's a better football team. Like you said, if they're in the AFC South, I think we're talking about them like competing for the division. Like they are definitely giving the Jags a run for their money in that division, but that is not their lot in life. They are comfortably the worst team in this division, even if they're okay. And that's going to be a problem. So again, like some of the prices on them it's just built in. There's just not a lot of ways that I like to bet it. Like you got to lay minus 165 for them to miss or finish 4th in division. Like it's like minus 300 to miss the playoffs. Like it just doesn't make any sense, even though I feel pretty good about them not making the playoffs. It's just not a bet or a bet style that I like to make. Do you have any interest in betting New England in any way?
Yeah, I'm not laying 300 on a season long bet like that just because juice isn't really worth the squeeze. I loved the under 7.5 when it was plus money earlier in the offseason, but it's obviously everyone agrees with me because now it's like heavily juiced to the under. I don't know what the best price out there is available. Like I think if you get minus 120 on the under 7.5, that's still a good bet. Anything steeper than that, and it's I don't have an exact number of how likely I think it is they go under 7.5, but it's definitely a bet that I'm happy to have in my pocket.
Yeah, let's see what their best price. I think it's like still like minus 130. I think still not something that we typically want to get involved in very much.
This is why you got to bet futures early. Like they move a lot over the course of the season, and it doesn't take that much. Like just have a sense of who these teams are and what their schedule looks like pretty early in the offseason, and you can identify these opportunities that they're eventually going to get bet. And if you bet it early, you could even play back the other side now and guarantee a profit if you wanted to. But it's steep. I mean, I think minus 300 is a plus EV bet technically to miss the playoffs. Yeah, I do actually. I think they have to make the playoffs, it's got to be like 10 to 15% in my opinion. But again, laying 300 on a season long bet, I don't know that I have the appetite for that.
Yeah. Minus 135 on Caesars is the best price under 7.5 for New England. So unprecedented territory, but not a great place at this, considering it's like 50, 60 points off of where it was.
Yeah. Minus 130 is probably fair. 35 is too steep.
Yeah. He just, again, like Bill O'Brien's going to be better, like undoubtedly better. But like, again, we're talking about Devontae Parker, Kendrick Bourne, Juju Smith-Schuster, like not guys that thrive in, none of those are wide receiver ones. Those are not big separators. Mike Gesicki in the slot, you're going to run a lot of 2 tight end. I think you see more of that from them this year. Like I think backed into having to give Ramondre Stevenson a massive role. I think they like him, but I don't think that they wanted him being like the leading target share guy for like a stretch of the season because none of the running backs are healthy and no one else could get open. It's just kind of a messy situation. So I think there's a lot that's going to be better. I like the depth defensively. They've had, like I said, speed. There's a lot of versatility that's significantly better, but they got to do it against a brutal slate and they have to show that they can do it against some of the better quarterbacks. So tough road for New England.
I also I don't think that the Belichick Mac Jones relationship has ever been particularly good. Like I think about, rookie year when Mac Jones was actually playing pretty well, and he had him throw 3 times against Buffalo on the road. It's like basically just, I just do not trust you to throw the ball. And then
Yeah.
last year benching him for Bailey Zappi, and then I think I saw a news report recently where it was like him and Zappi are going to miss the preseason game. That might have just been a rumor. I don't bet preseason, so I'm not as on top of it. But it's like treating it basically like maybe Zappi is like a potential starter. Like it just doesn't seem like a good situation. I think it's make or break for Mac Jones, and I don't believe in Mac Jones enough to think that he can overcome those circumstances.
Whatever that leash is, it's probably a little shorter if they start 0-4. And
Yeah.
that seems very much in the range of outcomes here. So yeah, tough slate for the Patriots and for the AFC East. I think you made a great point at the start. Whoever comes out of this is going to have shown a little bit of mettle that they are a real team to contend and mess with the Chiefs when we get to whatever happens here in the AFC. Again, just assuming that we get a healthy Patrick Mahomes, there's no scenario where the Chiefs aren't, very, very much in play at the tail end of the season. So if you've been able to come out of the AFC East, you've probably proven that you belong or at least should be in the discussion for that. So head over to the site. You can read Clark's preview. Mine's there as well if you want a little bit more detail on what we think of this division. We will be back next week with Connor to unpack another division here. We really appreciate hanging out with us. Again, subscribe, rate, review, jump in the comments here if you want to let us know what your favorite look is in the AFC East, and get the betting subscription. You get that in the show notes here as well, 4for4.com/plans. And join us for the year. Jump in the Discord, chat with us every week. We love that. Excited to unpack ball as we're getting close here. So for Clark, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.